Hello, conservation voters and friends. This is Lindsay Cross, Government Relations Director with Florida Conservation Voters. Happy Friday. You've made it through another week. Some of you may have been starting school, so hope that you are finding a safe way to educate your kiddos out there. I'm honored to be having my friend and fellow water warrior, Jen Lomberk, here today, who is the Executive Director of Matanzas Riverkeeper, to engage in a little water quality chat this afternoon. So the first question I want to ask you, Jen, have you sent in your ballot yet for the primary election?
Yes, I have, Lindsay.
All right, excellent.
Our first question. Thanks for having me on this afternoon.
I dropped mine off this morning. It could not have been easier. I got my pick of all the great stickers, so it was glad to do that. So if you have not turned in your ballot, Tuesday is the day. So let's get that out of the way, because we need to make sure we have strong conservation leaders up there in Tallahassee and across our nation fighting for our waters. And that is something that Waterkeepers is doing. And Jen, I would love for you to share a little bit of the structure of Waterkeepers, because I know that you're over there in the Matanzas area, but there's a whole network of people looking out for our special watery places around the nation.
Yeah, definitely. So Waterkeeper Alliance is a global network of grassroots leaders that work to protect everybody's right to clean water. And so the mission and the goal of the Waterkeeper Alliance is derived from the mission and the goal of the Clean Water Act. It's that everybody has a right to drinkable, fishable, swimmable waterways. And so we have this fantastic network of people all across the world that are doing this work. There are about 350 waterkeeper organizations in 44 different countries across the planet. And as you can imagine, the water quality issues from one waterkeeper to another are extremely varied. And so we've got everything from waterkeepers over in some African countries that work to provide clean drinking water to remote villages. We've got waterkeepers in South America that are working to make sure that foreign corporations don't dam rivers that indigenous populations depend upon. And then we've got a slew of different issues here in the United States as well, everything ranging from mining operations to factory farms and everything in between. So there's really a huge variety of water quality issues. And so we're really fortunate to have this kind of army of water warriors within the Waterkeeper Alliance that work on all of these issues. And so within Waterkeeper Alliance, we're really fortunate actually to have 14 waterkeepers right here in the state of Florida working on all of the still varied issues that we face with water quality within our beautiful state. And so we have this coalition called Waterkeepers Florida, where we all can band together to address some of these statewide issues, but then also we work individually on the waters within each of our own watersheds.
That's fantastic. I didn't realize that the worldwide alliance was so extensive. So I guess that means when you're able to safely travel again, you could go to another country and connect with some other waterkeepers and find out and share some best practices about what they're doing to engage their community members.
Definitely.
Yeah. Are most of the waterkeepers, are they coastal? Are they on freshwater systems? What's the focused area for a lot of them?
So there's really actually a huge variety of waterkeepers. It gets a little bit confusing because the overarching umbrella term is waterkeeper. If you do this job, you are a waterkeeper, but I am the Matanzas Riverkeeper. So depending on what body of water they work on, that's kind of what dictates how they're referred to. So we've got bay keepers, coast keepers, creek keepers, bayou keepers, and kind of everything in between. And so if there is a body of water that is worthy of this extra level of protection, and there is an advocate in the community that is willing to step up and take that charge, that's kind of how a waterkeeper organization is formed.
That's great. So do most of them operate as nonprofits?
Yes, that's a very important distinction. So all waterkeeper organizations are 501c3 non-governmental organizations. We are each our own individual nonprofit organization. And that's really critical as a waterkeeper because one of the key components of the work that we do is we make sure that polluters are held accountable. And a lot of times that means bringing a lawsuit against an industry or corporation, but in a lot of situations that also means bringing enforcement actions against local or state governments or the federal government when they aren't enforcing their own regulations that protect water quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because just because you have a law on the books doesn't mean that it's being enforced properly and that you're getting the protection that was that was designed with those type of regulations. And I know
Definitely.
we're going to talk more about policies and regulations during this chat. So for those of you who are just joining this conversation with Matanzas Riverkeeper, we're gonna ask some questions, but I would encourage you to start to put your comments and questions in the chat box, and we'll try and address as many as we can. But I want to focus a little bit more on your local area on the Matanzas River. So people from around the state or really around the world could be watching this right now. So tell us geographically where Matanzas is and a few things that make the Matanzas River special and worth protecting.
Oh, great question. So Matanzas River is in Northeast Florida. So if you've ever been to beautiful historic downtown St. Augustine and crossed the Bridge of Lions into the city, the Matanzas is the river that bridge crosses over. And so it is a coastal estuary. It's very, very salty. If I look abruptly out the window, it's because I'm at my office overlooking the water, and some dolphins go by pretty frequently, so I apologize for that. But it really is a special place for a lot of reasons. There's obviously the huge historical component here. There are 2 historic Spanish era forts that are built right on the banks of the Matanzas, so it has such a huge, rich history. And then also the water quality here is really good compared to a lot of areas around the state of Florida. The Matanzas is actually one of the last places in Northeast Florida where the water is clean enough for you to go out and harvest oysters from and have an oyster roast, risking a trip to the hospital. And so that's something that's really, really special and something that makes this place even that much more worthy of protection.
That's great. And you also have some good surfing out on the coast. I know 2 weeks ago Friday, I took a detour on my trip up to South Carolina to stop in St. Augustine so I could catch some of those storm waves on Saturday morning. And I can tell you that the breath holding work that I do with my paddling coach came into that I use that because I was under the waves more than I was on top of the waves. But it was still a beautiful way to start a Saturday morning, seeing the sunrise over the Atlantic, crossing over the Bridge of Lions, over Matanzas River to get out to the St. Augustine Pier. So I'm grateful that for the great water quality and also the access to those beaches there and the ability to get out and enjoy those resources. Yeah,
it's a special place.
Yeah. So let's dig into some of the policies and programs that you and the Matanzas Riverkeeper that you're focusing on over the next year. For example, if there's 2 or 3 things that we want to discuss, and we'll talk about some ways that the public can be involved with those efforts.
Sure. So like I mentioned, the water quality in the Matanzas is really good as compared to a lot of other places around the state. And that's kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it's beautiful here. People love coming here. People feel really passionate about getting outside and enjoying the natural resources. But on the other hand, it's very difficult to convince people that there is a mounting problem when it's not smacking them in the face, when it's not readily apparent. And so what we're experiencing here in the Matanzas River watershed is a rapid urbanization of this watershed. So we're located in St. Johns County, which is the 2nd fastest growing county in the state of Florida. It's consistently in the top 10 nationwide for fastest growing counties. And so we're seeing a lot of land use intensification within the watershed, a lot of urbanization. And so because of that, we're seeing this kind of mounting water quality problems with some of the issues that are associated with urbanization, like increased wastewater discharges, increased stormwater, more impervious surfaces, losing wetlands, litter created by more people. And so a lot of the issues that we work on locally are kind of those growth management and urbanization focused issues. So we are just wrapping up a project that we did with 1,000 Friends of Florida called St. Johns County 2070 that took a look at the growth trends for St. Johns County kind of on a 50-year time horizon, looking to the year 2070, just to kind of try and wrap our heads around what St. Johns County is going to look like in 50 years if we keep growing at the rate that we're currently growing. And as you can imagine, it paints a pretty dim picture. And the idea there isn't to just scare and depress everyone. It's to start to talk about what we can do now in 2020 to start to curb that trend so that so that the county is growing in a way that is smarter and more efficient and more protective of our natural resources, rather than just kind of doing this cookie cutter urban sprawl pattern that has kind of been encroaching on the county over the last decade or so. So that was a really great project. We had a lot of good partners locally that worked on that. And so now we're trying to start a conversation with our elected officials to get them to start to adopt and implement some of the recommendations that came out of that.
That's excellent. I know that Thousand Friends, in partnership with University of Florida several years ago, did a Florida 2070 projection where they looked at the entire state and looked at, the current population growth that we're experiencing and where we would be able to fit all those people. You hear the figures of anywhere between 900 and 1,000 new people coming to Florida every day, which is the size of Orlando each year. So that there is the importance of planning for that growth. And the report from Thousand Friends, the Florida 2070 and the Water 2070 project, one of the first things they emphasize is the importance of protecting valuable water in lands first, and really protecting first and then building around those places, because some of those natural areas, especially those rich with the wetlands, are so important to our water quality and our water quantity struggles, storing and filtering that water in our wetlands, making sure that we have adequate fresh water for the people that we have existing and the new Floridians. So I thought that was an important lesson, and I'm sure there were some of those those takeaway points in the projection specifically for St. Johns County.
Yeah, land conservation was one of the biggest recommendations that came out of that report. St. Johns County has a lot of wetland area, and as it's being developed, we're losing a lot of those wetlands. And a lot of people really just don't understand and appreciate just how valuable wetlands are to our environment. A lot of people kind of see them as swampland that needs to be filled in before you can do something with it. But the ecosystem services that wetlands provide in terms of carbon sequestration, floodwater retention, which is a huge issue in hurricane season, knock on wood, wildlife habitat, and then filtration for water quality as well. So it's an odd situation to be in, because it's almost like a death by 1,000 cut situation, where every time you lose a wetland, every time there's a new development that comes in and paves over what used to be pervious surfaces, you're adding on to the stress of the ecosystem. So there's not one major thing you can point out and say, that's the problem, that's what we need to fix. It's this kind of aggregation of all of these little things that are kind of building up and slowly starting to degrade the water quality. And so something that we try to really instill in people's minds is you have to protect what you love. We need to keep this wonderful while it's wonderful, because if you look at some of the other places around Florida where the water quality has really gotten to that tipping point, sometimes the amount of money and time and energy that it takes to fix it after it's broken makes it cost prohibitive, if not impossible. So you really have to step up and protect what you love.
Yeah. And we could be in a tipping point for a lot of our ecosystems, where you're shifting from a system that may be dominated by submerged vegetation like seagrasses. You start to get algae that comes into those systems from too much nutrients, from pollution, from fertilizers in your lawns. And once you start to get that algae growth, sometimes it can tip to a system that's dominated by that algae. And then you're not supporting sea turtles or manatees or the fish, like those small fish that need those estuaries and those seagrasses for the first couple of years of their life. So we could be, if we're not careful and putting resources into protecting the water and conserving areas, we may shift to a system where it is too costly to get back to some of those historical healthier conditions.
Definitely, yeah. And blue-green algae is another issue that we've been working on as a statewide organization from Waterkeepers Florida. So as you know, last year, Governor DeSantis appointed the blue-green algae task force to start to address the blue-green algae blooms that have been really devastating the environment and the economy across the state of Florida over the last couple of years. And the task force really has been pretty South Florida focused. And so one of the things that we've really been trying to keep really driving home with them is that blue-green algae isn't a specifically South Florida issue. I mean, we've got blue-green algae blooms ongoing in the St. Johns River here as well. So it really is a statewide issue. So we need statewide solutions to this problem.
And what's so important about blue-green algae that it warrants its own task force and so much focus on it?
Sure. So blue-green algae, it's kind of one of those triple threats where it affects the environment, the economy, and public health. And so it really is an issue for an array of reasons. It's not just isolated to being an environmental issue. I mean, I'm sure everybody has seen the pictures of the just guacamole covered water and the fish kills, but then also some of the larger animals that weren't able to survive the conditions down there. So it really is an issue on multiple fronts. And we're really just starting to be able to wrap our heads around the public health risks associated as well. And cyanotoxin, cyano blooms, this is something that happens globally. It's not just a Florida specific issue. And there are more and more studies saying that either acute exposure or prolonged exposure over time can have really detrimental effects to people, not even if you're just swimming in it or exposed to it incidentally, but it can aerosolize as the water is churned, and can have also health issues there as well. So it really is a pressing issue.
And is that the same toxin that was responsible for some of those dogs that died a couple of years ago? I remember that there were some big stories about that. Even Aaron Brockovich came down and was helping to share the story and the urgency really with the whole world about the importance of addressing this blue-green algae and the public health threat.
Yeah, so there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different species of blue-green algae. And obviously some type of algae is okay or beneficial to certain ecosystems. It's when you have these really concentrated, overwhelming blooms that you start to develop issues. And then when you have the species of blooms that create these cyanotoxins, that's also when you start to see these problems. And there are a lot of different types of cyanotoxins that these blue-green algae blooms can create. And so it's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around just because it's so varied. But that was a big problem with people's dogs that were swimming or drinking the water and then getting really sick afterwards. I mean, when people's pets start being affected by these things, it's going to be an issue. That's how I feel. Absolutely.
Are there certain recommendations that you're hoping that this task force makes related to the cyanotoxin? Like what are you and the other river keepers hoping comes out of this discussion?
Yeah, so Waterkeepers Florida have asked that the Blue-Green Algae Task Force recommend that the Department of Environmental Protection adopt water quality standards for cyanotoxins. And that's really important because when you have water quality standards for a specific pollutant, what that does is that triggers the provisions under the Clean Water Act that necessitate remediation for that pollutant. So if there is a water body in the state that's not meeting the water quality standards for a certain pollution, it's called an impaired water body. Mm-hmm. And so once a water body is declared impaired, then the state has to develop a TMDL, a total maximum daily load. And that basically dictates how much of the pollution can be assimilated by the water body in order for it to still be meeting those water quality standards. And then beyond that, they develop their Basin Management Action Plan, which is the plan of attack to figure out how they're going to meet that TMDL. But if there aren't those numeric water quality standards, then that process isn't triggered. And that's the situation that we're in right now. We know that there are blue-green algae blooms. We know that there are cyanotoxins. We know it's a problem, but it doesn't have any legal teeth for that enforceability. So that's why we're really pushing for the task force to adopt those water quality standards. And then beyond the water quality standards, we're also pushing for a more consistent and comprehensive approach to the public health notification side of it. Because unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize just how dangerous these cyanotoxins can be. And so there are still people swimming in these areas and boating and eating the fish that they're getting from these waterways. And it's not always safe to do so. And unfortunately, the Department of Health isn't consistent about getting signage out that warns people of the risks associated with interacting with these blue-green algae blooms. So we're really calling for a consistent, comprehensive statewide approach to posting notifications when there are blooms present.
And that's so important. I know that if there's heavy rainfall or, heaven forbid, a sewage spill, there's signage on beaches that says that it's not safe for people or animals to be in the water. But it's important that for something like the blue-green algae that people are notified too, because there can be those persistent health problems associated with that.
Definitely. And another component of it is that those signs need to be accessible to all different people, especially down in South Florida. We need those signs to be in English and Spanish in order to make sure that it's relaying the information to all of the users of those waterways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what has Waterkeepers been doing within the blue-green algae task force? I know that I listened in on a webinar a couple weeks ago. I know you were part of it. Are there ways that the public can be active in that forum?
Yeah, so we definitely encourage the public to weigh in at the Blue-Green Algae Task Force meetings. They just held a meeting at the end of July that they did virtually. And so you don't have to drive across the state in order to get there. You can watch it online and call in to make comments. And so as Waterkeepers Florida, we have been weighing in with comments at those meetings and then also providing comment documents to the task force members, really underscoring the importance of adopting these water quality standards, but then also illustrating the current shortcomings of the warning signage system that's currently in place. We did a survey among 3 watersheds across the state to look at public access points that had blue-green algae blooms present over the course of May and June of this year. And 77% didn't have any signage notification alerting people of the presence of those blue-green algae blooms. So that just really underscores the inconsistency in getting the warning signs out.
Are they always visible? I mean, if you were a tourist, if you went to the beach, would you know that there would be a public health threat?
So not always. The thing with all of these different types of blue-green algae blooms is that they kind of look a little bit different. I mean, some of them are the really obvious in-your-face ones that make the water literally look like guacamole, but some of them kind of suspend themselves in the water column, so they're not aggregated on the surface, so it's harder to detect that there's something dangerous there.
Wow. Yeah. So having those timely public health notifications is going to be so important for protecting Floridians and visitors.
Definitely.
Yeah. DEP, I know, has their hands full with a lot of different things that they're juggling. Of course, they manage some of the conservation programs. They're helping to enforce our environmental laws. Stormwater is another thing that they're going to be taking up over the next couple years. I actually wrote my master's thesis on industrial stormwater regulations. So if anyone wants a great thesis to put themselves to sleep to at night, I'd be happy to share that. But I can tell you that that there's a lot of intricacies to regulations, to stormwater. It's not as easy as identifying a single pipe that's discharging pollution into a water body. That stormwater is picking up pollutants and dirts and oils and greases from really everywhere. What's going to happen with some of this? So I know there's going to be a stormwater rulemaking process. So what's the intention of that, and what do you think can come out of that that's going to better protect our water quality?
Yeah, one of the major drivers of nutrient pollution and other types of pollutants as well is stormwater. And so basically, a lot of people don't really understand how stormwater management works in the state of Florida. And if you kind of go back and look at it, the main focus of stormwater management intentionally was to keep areas from flooding. So it was to remove the water from residential areas and commercial areas as fast as possible and get it into a waterway, get it off the land. And unfortunately, what has happened as a result of that is that when we have these heavy rain events, it's pretty much picking up all of the pollution that was on the land and just flushing it immediately into our waterways. So fertilizer, pesticides, things that run off from your house, from your car, on the streets, all of that is just kind of getting flushed into our waterways whenever we have storm events. And so there is a requirement that new developments have stormwater treatment systems. So retention ponds, detention ponds. I'm sure everybody has seen one or has one in their neighborhood. And the idea there is that the stormwater should be retained in order for some of those pollutants to be filtered out or to settle out before that water is discharged into the waterways. And unfortunately, the way that the regulations work is that if these stormwater management systems are designed in a certain way, it is presumed that they comply with state water quality standards. There is a presumption of compliance that if you build it this way, it's not degrading the water quality. And unfortunately, the science has really started to show that that's not the case, that stormwater management systems are not meeting those pollutant reduction goals that they are theoretically required to. Because unfortunately, as it currently stands, there's no ground truthing to that. There's this presumption of compliance that if you build it right, it's working right. And so because of that, and because of the rapid growth our state has experienced, a lot of these stormwater systems just aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so as a result of that, DEP is beginning the process to update these stormwater regulations across the state. And so that's going to be really critical in terms of addressing nutrient pollution, but other types of pollution as well. And something that we really want to underscore here is that, as you mentioned, we've got 900 people moving to the state of Florida every single day. So we obviously need higher standards for new stormwater systems that are going in, but we also need to think about retrofitting the thousands of stormwater systems that already exist that aren't doing their jobs. Because if we're just increasing the capacity for future systems, there's still a net increase in water quality degradation.
Yeah. I know that a lot of those systems are designed to remove about maybe 80% of solids or maybe 60% of nutrients, but that means that you're still getting a quantity of those pollutants into the water body. So if you lose even a couple percentage points of effectiveness, and you multiply that by the literally thousands of stormwater ponds throughout our state, you can just think about, all of those pollutants, that loading that's going into our water bodies. And a theme that I hear both from you and my conversation last week with Florida Springs Council is that for some of our regulated entities or systems, there's this presumption of compliance that if you do it according to this guidebook, everything should be fine, but there's not the checkup and there's not the monitoring to support that. And I know that it's hard to get out to every water body to get enough data, but it really underscores the importance of having data to make decisions. Maybe there's some systems that are functioning really well, but maybe there's places where we can shift some of our resources to retrofit a system that's not functioning well. Maybe it's because the soils in that area are different than another place that drains quicker, for example. So having that monitoring data, I know that, us both being scientists, we are geeks in that regards, that we want to make sure that we have the data that we can look at and we're not just making decisions, on the fly.
Oh no, I'm not a scientist. I'm an attorney. I just play.
Oh, you're an attorney. Okay.
Yeah. So my brain automatically goes to kind of the regulatory side of it. As an attorney, I'm looking at these rules. I'm looking at implementation. I'm looking at enforcement. So I really do have to rely on scientists like you and like some of the other water keepers to get that data and to help me understand how these rules either will work or will not work.
So how will the public be able to be engaged in the stormwater rulemaking process?
So there's currently one more kind of pre-workshop informational webinar that is scheduled for the stormwater rulemaking. It's going to be on August 24th. And again, it's a webinar online, so you're welcome to watch it. And then they are soliciting written public comments through October of this year. So if you are a stormwater design engineer and would like to weigh in on the rulemaking, that is the way that you would do it. And then the official rulemaking will kick off on January 1st of next year.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly not a stormwater engineer, but I know that you and the Waterkeepers have, a whole host of experts and scientists on your different staffs and throughout your network that are going to be, giving some strong recommendations to DEP for that. So I appreciate that. There was a question about the Clean Water Act and TMDLs with pollutants like blue-green algae that can where you can have a high concentration and then dissipate. So different from point source pollutants or even ag runoff, where it may be easier to calculate the quantities.
Yeah, so one of the issues with the blue-green algae blooms is, to a certain extent, it can be like chasing ghosts. If you have a bloom in an area where the water is moving pretty quickly, if somebody reports it, by the time somebody gets out there to sample it, it may or may not be there anymore. And so that's a problem because it may have moved to somewhere else where people could be recreating in that waterway. So really, adopting the water quality standards to address the cyanotoxins would necessitate stopping pollution at its source. And that's something that we really try and drive home, is that you can play environmental whack-a-mole and try and fix these problems as they keep popping up. But the way that you're really going to be able to address these issues is to start to really identify and address the underlying sources. So the nutrient pollution that is feeding these algae blooms, it's absolutely critical to come at it from that angle. Otherwise, you are just chasing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a question that came in about regional permits and the importance of wetlands, how they should not be treated the same as other lands. I think that's a question that kind of goes back to the purview of some of our water management districts and the importance of having people having adequate members on the governing boards who are helping to make those decisions. That's something that's been called for by different groups recently, that Governor DeSantis fill the vacancies on 4 out of the 5 of the water management district boards. There are permits that are issued for construction and development. A lot of that goes through the DEP and the water management district. So we need people who are accountable and have the best science understanding, and who have really are going to be looking out for protection of our water and our community members. So yeah. Great question, Ginger. Hopefully that answered your question.
To build on that a little bit, the Department of Environmental Protection is currently undergoing the process to try and adopt the implementation authority for Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Mm-hmm. And basically that section of the Clean Water Act is what dictates dredging and filling of wetlands. And so as it currently stands, there's kind of this parallel track. If anybody wants to do something that affects the wetland, they have to get permissions from both the state and the federal government before they can move forward with that. And if DEP assumes implementing authority of that program, we'll no longer have that safety net of federal checks and protections, as well as state checks and protections to protect our wetlands. And frankly, they're trying to assume this program without any additional capacity in terms of financing or resources or staffing. And as it currently stands, they're really struggling to keep up with their current water quality programs as far as the TMDL goes. And so we're really pushing back against the state taking over the authority of that program.
Yeah. And I think probably the counter argument would be, why do you want to duplicate the efforts? But I think it's not a duplication of efforts. You are bringing different expertise, and it's important to have eyes on these things, because once you destroy these wetlands, it's so difficult to get them back in that condition that they historically were. I spent many years doing coastal and freshwater wetland restoration, overseeing programs in Tampa Bay. And I can tell you that we spend millions of dollars to try and restore and recreate what we destroyed in the past. So the more we can protect these healthy, intact systems like our wetlands now, and if that requires continued oversight by US EPA, then I think that's an appropriate thing to do. Definitely. Yeah. So Jen, we are kind of ending our time. It seems like it went by so quickly. What other things are you excited about that Waterkeepers is engaged in this year, or that you want the public to know about?
So one of the things that we have been working on is the state's triennial review of water quality standards. So under the Clean Water Act, the Department of Environmental Protection is required to do a review of their water quality standards for all of the different pollutants every 3 years, and see if any of them need to be updated based on available science that has been developed and published in the interim every 3 years. And so we were working with the state on that. That was kind of where we started, really pushing for the cyanotoxin standards to be adopted. And that's been an ongoing process. Unfortunately, it's moving very, very slowly right now. And as you mentioned, the same issue with the water management district boards having so many vacancies, the ERC, the Environmental Regulation Commission, that would have to approve the triennial review update. There are a lot of vacancies on that board as well, and they have not been meeting consistently. And so, unfortunately, the state is really dragging its feet on moving those forward. So that's something that we're working on, is really trying to make sure that those standards are strengthened where they need to be, and that the cyanotoxin standards are eventually adopted to better protect public health and the environment.
That's fantastic, Jen. I'm just so impressed with all of the work that the Waterkeepers are doing. I mean, those are big issues that you guys are engaged with, in the advocacy, holding our elected officials and our agencies accountable, making sure that the public has opportunities to be part of these really important decision-making processes. So I appreciate that so much, Jen. It's great to work with partners like the Waterkeeper, because we know that the more that we can collaborate on things and have a unified voice. Of course, there's things that are specific to your area in Matanzas or other places throughout the state, but we're really all trying to protect the places that we love and that help to make Florida the special place that it is. And the Matanzas area is certainly one of the jewels that we have in our state. So thank you for all of that work. What are you doing to get out and enjoy the river or the coast this weekend? Any plan?
Yeah, beach weekend for sure. It looks like we'll get some afternoon thunderstorms, but I'm definitely going to be making my way over to the ocean side of the barrier island and then probably to the river side as well. There might be some paddleboarding in my future this weekend.
Fantastic. Well, next time I head over to St. Augustine, we'll have to have a paddleboard date.
Oh, definitely. I'd love that.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining in. You can share this video. It'll be available on the Florida Conservation Voters website. We'll also post a link to the Matanzas Riverkeeper site so that you can stay active and keep up with all the great work that they're doing as well. So thank you so much, Jen. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll keep fighting.
Thanks, Lindsay. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.